How did people try to cure the plague? Flagellant. 14th century. European continent. The Black Death, more commonly known as the bubonic plague, swept through Europe beginning in the mid-14th century. However, this was not the first instance of the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages. Rumors about the Great Pestilence reached the European continent all the way from the Middle East and Asia before the plague itself was brought by ship. The plague wrought contagion, horror, and death upon the people of Europe from the time it landed in Sicily and gradually spread over the continent and even to the British Isles. The bubonic plague is characterized first by swelling lymph nodes in the armpits and groin known as buboes. These buboes would swell to the size of an egg, sometimes even to the size of an apple, bringing severe pain to the victims. The next stage of the sickness was the pus and blood that would seep from the swellings. This was followed by terrible aches and pains, fever, vomiting, and diarrhea. People at the time had no idea how the plague spread, believing that even touching the victim's clothing would cause contagion. However, the true cause of the plague were the fleas carried between houses by people and animals, specifically rats. The contagion spread throughout the continent as healthy people fled into the countryside and even across the English Channel, trying to escape infection, but in reality, they were bringing the infected fleas with them. The plague spread quickly throughout Europe, killing up to 50 million people and infecting even more. Due to the intensity and horror of the Black Death, without a plausible explanation at the time, people in the Middle Ages cast blame on a variety of things, the largest of which being the wrath of God. In the middle of the 14th century, some people believed the way to appease God's wrath was to kill those they saw as heretics. This meant that thousands of Jews, foreigners, the impoverished, and other religious pilgrims were killed in an attempt to please God. However, while some people tried to cure the plague by punishing others, some tried to cure it by punishing themselves. This form of religious self-punishment was known as flagellation, and it experienced a revival on a new scale because of the Black Death. Flagellant groups emerged in Italy, Eastern Europe, Germany, and the Low Countries, and spread throughout Europe. Flagellants were religious zealots who tried to atone for their sins and therefore cure the plague through public displays of penance. This atonement was based in the imitation of the way Jesus suffered as he was whipped by Roman guards before being crucified for the sins of the world. The flagellants would whip themselves publicly several times a day, traveling to different towns in a procession every 33.5 days, gaining more followers in each town they went to. Some groups of flagellants differentiated themselves from other citizens by wearing hoods over their faces, but exposed their backs to show their wounds. This provided an element of modesty and humility into the act of flagellation. They were not to be viewed or worshipped as holy beings themselves, but their actions were meant to be viewed as atonement for the sins of all humanity. The whips consisted of 3 leather cords that had knots on each end, which sometimes had metal nails or iron spikes embedded, so that the flagellant would draw even more blood and possibly atone even deeper for their worldly sins. Flagellant's blood could be seen spattering walls, roads, and bystanders, and some saw the blood as a holy relic. Eventually, Pope Clement VI condemned the action of the flagellants as heretical because he viewed them as potential usurpers of Catholic power that caused trouble and instilled false hope. On October 20th, 1349, the flagellant movement was officially condemned in a bull, and church leaders were ordered to suppress it. With the end of the bubonic plague in the late Middle Ages, the flagellant movement had all but disappeared. However, it was not the flagellants and their actions who cured the plague. Sanitation and cold weather finally killed off the remnants of the fleas carrying the plague, leaving the European population devastated but still surviving.